Hello everyone, Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Rena Sherbill, host of the Cannabis Investing podcast and senior editor at Seeking Alpha. Okay. Yeah, so like I was saying, you were mentioning the backdrop, right, of my new studio, because I just finished the move, and so that my coworker, my fiance, her desk is behind me. She's not in the office currently. She's
As we can see.
So I've got the office space to myself this morning. But yeah,
That's awesome.
it's been.
Wait, do you guys work together on this podcast? Is that your coworker? Is that what you mean?
No, she's actually a stylist, an online stylist. So
cool.
fashion. So that's what she does. So we just work together in the same room, basically.
Got you. That's what you meant by coworker. Well, that is like very impressive. Total relationship goals. More power to you both. That is very impressive.
We've been enjoying it. Yeah, it's nice to. That's one, I guess, good positive outcome from the pandemic is. The realization that we don't need to be in an office space or a cubicle all the time to get the work done,
Yeah.
And
well, I've actually worked from home for a long time, so that's a lesson I learned long ago, and one I don't ever want to forget, because I think it's like, I feel like if you understand the new way of getting things done and accomplishing things, it's different than like sit in a box, pound out your work, call it a day. I feel like we're probably, both of us, I would say, we're in our jobs at some point, like throughout the day and night, because it's like creative work, it's thinking about things, it's producing, it's, all of that stuff that I'm sure it's totally not 9 to 5. And yet at the same time with like more freedom than just like going into an office.
Totally. Like the work-life balance, working from home compared to an office, it's totally different. I mean, you can wake up in the morning when you're working from home and enjoy a cup of coffee, let your dogs out, maybe even make breakfast for yourself if you don't like have a real busy morning. But if you're working in an office, especially if you're commuting, I mean, you're rushing to get ready, you're jumping in your car, you're hitting traffic, your stress levels are already higher, so I think overall, just as being a human, it's better to work from home, in my opinion. But
yes, could not agree more. I think a lot of companies are figuring that out too.
yeah, and they're going to save a lot of money on commercial real estate, which is going to be an interesting space post-COVID, and see how that market responds to what's going on.
Agreed. I think in general, the whole notion of spaces is so interesting right now, because it was being disrupted before COVID. Now it's being decimated, I think, totally reconstructed. Like, I'm sure you're in Dallas, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure in Dallas you guys have this too. In Tel Aviv, they're making like these public buildings that aren't really being used for anything right now. Like the sides of them are now drive-in movies or big warehouse space, like socially distant, some kind of event. So it's like interesting to see. And obviously like the whole, WeWork, that whole business model is interesting to see what happens there. If it's like how they're reworking WeWork.
Yeah. I mean, with WeWork, that was always an interesting business model. I actually was a member there in 2 different locations in Dallas. And from what I gathered, they were really placing their bets on the office space that catered to large corporations, so they were looking to sign those deals with like the Facebooks of the world or the Amazons of the world. Because the 1 person or 2 person office space wasn't really cutting it in terms of their overall costs,
Yeah.
So there were a lot of big office spaces that were empty for a while. I remember. I don't know if that's changed. I know that they're hurting now due to what's been happening. But like you said, it's interesting to see what they do to pivot.
Yeah, definitely. I think like there's stuff to be done. If you want to pivot, there's stuff to be done. The notion of just being like, COVID just screwed me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? obviously some people don't have that, but if you're talking about a huge corporation, like with some funding and, means to capital, I feel like there's no reason why they can't make that work. I don't know. I have to mention this. I don't know if you ever watched Broad City. Did you ever watch that show? There was a great episode where one of the main characters went into a WeWork office and she kind of like recalibrated and called it She Work and kind of just like rented out public space on the New York City sidewalk just for like women entrepreneurs is pretty amazing. So if you're looking at it like that, I feel like the time has come, for a pivot.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so many companies are going to have to pivot, and it's going to be interesting and fun to see at the same time. So, before we get into what's been happening in the cannabis market and whatnot, you were on a recent staycation, is that right?
I was on a recent staycation. Yeah, not. We were supposed to be. My daughter turned 18 this summer, and our birthdays are a day apart. We were supposed to be in Costa Rica. She graduated high school. She turned 18. That was supposed to be the big trip. That obviously is not on the table anymore. And then like 5 days before we were that trip was supposed to have happened, we went down south with friends and did like a guided tour of like the ancient spice route. It was super interesting and cool. That's one of the things we did on the staycation. And the guy that led the tour was also supposed to be in Costa Rica with his family. So it was like this really funny look where COVID put us all together. We were supposed to be there all together and now we're here. So
I,
yeah, I was saying to somebody the other day, like at first the notion of staycation sounds like a little depressing, especially when we had like a super fun. I mean, it was an area of the world that I've never been to, my daughter's never been to. So it's like we've been super psyched about this for a while. And then it's like, okay, now we're just here and like looking for Airbnbs and it's kind of depressing and the vibe in the city is like kind of depressing and people are really hurting and but it ended up being so much fun. So as like another one of the COVID silver linings, I think first of all we realized there's so much stuff to tap into here that we don't because we're always like where to next, where to next, where to next. There's just beautiful things to see and learn, and there's something about not traveling so much for your vacation and just kind of like focused on what you're doing and also seeing friends, that live in different parts of the country that we don't see as much and getting like quality time. So
uh,
yeah, it was a nice turnaround.
No, absolutely. And just the fact of just even probably getting out of the house, and doing something, right? As opposed to being quarantined and feeling like you're in lockdown with all these regulations and stuff. It's just nice to get out and do something and learn about the local area, like you said. Uh,
Absolutely.
we've talked about doing a staycation recently also here in Dallas. There's really cool hotel that where we live. Um,
Yeah.
pretty close, and so we were like, yeah, we could hang out at the pool during the day, and then one of us will like do paper rock scissors to see who has to take the dogs out. We could just drive back to the house, you know,
That's funny. That's
not have to
funny.
worry about a sitter or anything. So,
That's funny. And
but
are rates down? Like here, they're like incentivizing like local stays for like local, like it's like cheaper and it's nice. I mean, I think some people are taking this opportunity to like screw everybody over, but I think there's some businesses that are doing what maybe I would do and just kind of trying to help the fellow man and try and make things nicer. So that's also like a nice, I think, thing to see, like local businesses trying to get local citizens kind of a nice deal, which is
mm,
fully
yeah,
support.
we've been trying to support local businesses as much as we can. I mean, like
Yeah.
as you know, we talked about last time, I was in the process of moving. We're in a new neighborhood now, and it's so cool. There's so many awesome like restaurants and bars and boutique shops and whatnot. So um, the ones that are open, we're trying to do our part to help them out. So it's tough times, Rena. It is very interesting to say the least.
Tough, yeah, tough times, but I think also like we're realizing like that. Like I, buy so much of my stuff from like Amazon and now I'm buying it all like as you said, like local, not all, but mostly locally sourced. And I feel like sometimes we have to be pushed to uncomfortable places to do better. Are you happy with the move? Is it what you guys were hoping for?
It is, and more, to be honest. I mean, like before we had a really nice place. It was very spacious and roomy and in a good neighborhood, but like it lacked things activities to do outdoors,
Yeah.
so where we're at now, we're right across the street from a park that has a lake, and there's a rec center and an aquatic center, and we have a private pool in our townhome complex. So
Oh, nice.
for us to do like outside, um, it's a little farther outside, not outside of Dallas, but like on the other side of the river. But it's only like 10 minutes drive back into the city, so it's not bad at all. It's nice.
That's awesome. That's
Checking
awesome.
it. Yeah. So you've been pretty. We both have been pretty busy this month, this past month in August with our podcasts, and I've been. We took a road trip to Missouri, and so I was listening a lot to your episodes. Did a great job, and I noticed that one of the podcasts you had recently was with the CEO of TrueLeaf, which
Mhm.
anyone who listens to the cannabis investing podcast, or who has listened to you on the show, know that you're a big fan of that company and what they're doing, female owned and operated, and just really setting the bar right. So why don't we start with that and tell me your conversation with Kim Rivers and what you thought about that.
Yeah, first of all, glad that you're listening to it on road trips. Love to hear that. Yeah, so this is like one of, it's funny, I've been thinking about this because last time I was on with you, we talked about things we've learned from podcasting and, along the way, things we've picked up. And I feel like something I'm understanding now, is I've been doing this like a year and a half, is ways to kind of like grow the content beyond just here's an interview with somebody, hope you enjoy it, which there's sometimes a ton of value in those. But also, I feel like, especially because, so truly, I think for cannabis investors, I think even if you're even just peripherally paying attention right now to the sector, and again, want a disclaimer, I am not a professional financial advisor. I am a podcast host, a journalist, a writer, and it's all a reflection of my own journey through understanding cannabis investing, but do not take it as gospel or as sound financial advice. It is simply subjective. Um, but having said that, I feel like Trulieve is doing so well. I think in February they were around $6. Now they're over $22. But also not just a flash in the pan and not just rallying on positive sentiment. There's, as you said, Kim is the CEO and she's just been running it like a boss should run a company, just super disciplined and just a well-managed, thoughtful company that's also doing right on the social equity side of things and doing right by their employees also, which we talked about in the podcast. But anyway, so just to give that background as why I like to talk about TrueLeaf, I just think it's a great stock run by great management, doing great things, and I feel like the runway for growth is kind of wide open. I think Cantor Fitzgerald came out with like a $59 price target, and they're just at over $22. I know so many people that are calling me up about that stock because I've been talking about it for like 8 months, and people that were hearing that way back when, like, yeah, are now like, wait, so anyways, super excited. So I've developed a relationship with Kim and with TrueLeaf since I interviewed Kim back in January, and then they came on as like to sponsor the podcast. Go ahead.
What impressed you back in January? Like that was when you really became a believer, I guess, or maybe it was before that. But what was it that initially was like, okay, these guys are different, and here's why.
Yeah, not to be confused with a true lever, which is what they call the fans of the company.
Become a true believer, yeah.
Yeah, which is not to be confused with a believer. It's all different things. So what convinced me? So I just felt like the Florida market was being established as kind of, look, people in Florida love cannabis. And it was just the number of patients was growing and growing and growing, and you could see that it was a market there for the taking. And TrueLeaf, while it's an MSO, which means multi-state operator, which means they have businesses in multiple states, and most of the MSOs, especially at that time, there were a lot of M&As, a ton of acquisitions, a ton of just like rampant expansion. And really, this time last year, I was talking to a number of MSO CEOs and executives who were just totally focused on growth. True Leaf was focused on Florida. And they're like, we're going to do this and we're doubling down on Florida. We're going to establish ourselves as a market leader there. We're going to do you want to interrupt me? Okay.
My dogs were barking. I went on mute to tell them to stop barking. Sorry. Go ahead.
I got you. I got you. They're providing a lot of like fun little elements in the background. It's fun to see them running around. They look like they really get along too.
They're crazy. This is their room also, by the way. So these are my other coworkers.
Wow.
But
So you're infringing on them. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so Trulieve wanted to like establish themselves as a leader in Florida, and a lot of people question that. A lot of seasoned analysts question that. A lot of investors question that. Why aren't you expanding? So many other people are expanding. How are you going to, reach profitability when you're not in all these markets? And that business model just like really proved itself over time. It was starting to in January, and then I would say Liberty Health is another player there. Cure Leaf is another player in Florida. And they both do fairly well, but they don't touch True Leaf. Nobody touches True Leaf. So they've become like, I was going to say king, but I'll say queen of the market in Florida. And it's a great booming market. And now they're taking that and they're growing it to Massachusetts, which is another exciting state, I think, with a lot of runway ahead. They're doing what they did in Florida. I think they're going to start doing it in Massachusetts. Connecticut, they're starting to open up to. And then the more I sort of started reading about the stock, it was also interesting. I had been trying to get an interview with Kim for a while. And before I had heard back from them, the Grizzly Research, which is a short seller firm, meaning they're short stocks that they publish damaging reports on, came out with kind of a incendiary report about Trulieve. And it's anybody that researches Trulieve knows that there was an FBI case involving Kim's husband that really has nothing to do with the business itself, but it's kind of just like for gossip, right. Or just like, their names are in this FBI file. So I think it freaks some people out, but Kim has addressed it from the very beginning. I mean, it's in the corporate filings, like this FBI case. And the other questions that the report came out with, I think anything that was true was had already been addressed by Kim. And the other things I feel like were taken out of context. So, but this was before I talked to Kim and I was interested, like, okay, well, let's see what happens. I mean, I've been working at Seeking Alpha for a number of years. We publish a number of these short seller reports. So I know some of them aren't just incendiary and like, hyperbolic. I know some of them are true. And even though I kind of saw that they weren't really unearthing anything new, I still thought it was interesting let's see how they react to this. And Kim, like really in my podcast with her, really addressed it head on. And also they filed a libel suit against Grizzly. And I just felt like that's exactly what you want management to do. If you think that you're being wronged, address it, and fight it. And that's exactly what they did. And I just asked Kim about it today, in my last interview. And, she said they're still pursuing the suit and it's been delayed because of COVID. But so if you're asking what excited me, I would say those things. I felt like their business model was a little bit different and smart, and it's been proven out. And I felt like management was really showing up and standing behind all the kind of superlatives they were giving out about the stock and about the opportunities.
Yeah. I could see why those particular examples would lead you to be a true lever, as you put it, because I mean, obviously it starts with management and the people that you hire and the leaders of the company, right? And really what their intentions are, and of course their skill set and their background and their experience, right? But also, their business model needs to also be proven. But the transparency aspect that you mentioned, like the fact that she was very straightforward and head on with some of those difficult questions, while it's so basic and simple, I mean, it's really a huge factor and differentiator when it comes to business, right? The businesses that are more transparent and open about their operations and what's going on seem to gather more brand loyalty, right?
Absolutely. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like, it seems like, why isn't every management team transparent? Why aren't they all forthcoming to investors? Because some of them are shady. I think that's just one straight up answer is some of them don't want to be transparent because they don't want you to know what's going on, behind the curtains. And I think the other issue is some people don't have the experience. Some people don't have the corporate governance or the understanding of how maybe their balance sheet should look, how the financial side of things should work. And maybe I say this especially in the cannabis sector because there's many people that started a cannabis company without having, I think, the proper background or maybe surrounding themselves with the proper framework and support to become a profitable company. I think that's especially true in this industry. So, but yeah, I think it's curious why more management teams don't do it, but at the same time, you see it fairly infrequently. So it's like these are the people that are doing it right. And I think I said in my second interview with Kim, like when they're teaching the course of like the Green Rush days, I think they'll look to her as one of the great kind of like executives in the cannabis industry and somebody that really is pushing it forward in a meaningful way.
What I didn't catch what her background was. Did she come from the cannabis industry before?
No, she's coming from the lawyer. She is a lawyer. She's coming from an attorney background and has some experience in real estate and has also some business background. But she basically came on board truly because she had a lot of really strong contacts in the Florida market. And basically, Trulieve started as a group of people that had been on the kind of plant side of things for years and just had a lot of strong contacts in the state and felt like, okay, medical marijuana is going to open up. We can really parlay this into a real, business venture. And they brought Kim on board, I think, for her corporate governance, her legal background. I think she has a smart business mind. I think they saw that she would be a real asset. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that too. The executives that are coming from different industries that are entering the cannabis space. Um, Look, this isn't a knock to the current or the recreational THC market, but that stigma of Cheech and Chong and hippie yippie kind of stuff is apparent in some places, especially when it comes to business, right? So the more that we can legitimize the industry by bringing in executives and business leaders who have past experience and success in other industries is good, and I think it sets a new standard for how things should run and be operated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And it's nice to see. I mean, I can think of like a couple of examples in the MSO space where that's true, where I like the companies and the CEO is coming from outside the industry, has had success outside the industry, and is taking that and parlaying that into success in the cannabis industry. Yeah, I think, and look, I also have a real soft spot for people that are coming from within the industry, especially people that have been like working the black market side of things for years. And once the laws are catching up, they're able to kind of, translate that into more profits. Like I'm also super supportive of that. But I think that anytime you have an advantage and you can bring something new to the industry, which I think in this case, strong corporate governance, serious fiscal responsibility, I think those are really needed and in the cannabis industry. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a huge advantage to coming into the space from there.
Are you seeing that as like a a data point or a trend in terms of like if you were to look at all the current companies, ancillary companies, core companies within the cannabis space, the ones that do have executive leadership outside of that industry, are you seeing that they're doing better or they're more successful?
Man, that's a good question. I don't feel like I've really looked at it like that enough. I don't think I've measured people coming from outside against people that are coming from within. I will say that I've interviewed, I'm trying to think now just like the people that I've interviewed and where they lay. And I feel like it's fairly split, that I feel like I've interviewed a bunch of people that have come from, well, look, I mean, everybody starts somewhere outside. Very rarely is somebody totally just been in the cannabis industry. I mean, especially if you're talking about people that have had successes, mostly they've had a success somewhere outside the industry, even if they've been peripherally involved in the cannabis industry for a while. Um, so I guess my anecdotal only answer is it seems that yeah, it benefits people to have something from the outside, because I'm even thinking of like a few examples of people that have been in the cannabis industry for quite a while, but I think what's keeping them successful is outside successes and outside lessons that they're able to put together with what works in the cannabis industry.
Sure. Yeah. And it's, I guess it's obvious that the more experience you have in having your hand in different industries and learning how different things operate, like you said, it's kind of like a puzzle that you're putting together.
Yeah, yeah. I want to finish one thing about the True Leave Kim thing, because I feel like this is something that I took on. And I just want to say, like, it was my third time interviewing her. And I feel like something that I took away from it was here I've developed this relationship with this company and with Kim. And I feel like not just to promote them or not just to develop a further understanding of the stock, but I was also kind of like, much like you do, where you ask listeners for question ideas before the show. And I feel like I myself have learned so much from asking people. I think the MSO space in general right now is like really exciting to people because there's so many railing share prices. But I think there's a lot of questions around it. Like, a lot of those companies have taken on a lot of debt. Why aren't they issuing stock as opposed to issuing debt? The onerous banking regulations, if safe banking doesn't pass, are they going to be okay in the long term? And really like getting into that with Kim. So anyways, I just wanted, I feel like there's something about having, I feel like one of the first things you and I bonded over at the end of our first episode was our love of Seinfeld. And I feel like something that he talks about is, at the beginning of doing Seinfeld, he felt like they didn't have that wit or timing yet, and it wasn't exactly the show that it became, and a lot of people wanted to cancel it. And he said, like, the only reason we became what we became is because somebody had patience to let the content kind of like grow and breathe and improve. And so as like a content creator, and you're a content creator, I just feel like it's so it's really inspiring and encouraging, I think, when the people that you are doing the show for, I mean, you're obviously doing it for yourself too, but also for the listeners, and when they're giving you feedback, and I just feel like it becomes this like great organic thing that keeps growing and growing, and you're learning and they're learning, and yeah, so that's, I feel like, something that I'm really loving about doing a podcast right now.
Same. I totally agree. And the way you explained is perfect. It's like this living organism that's continually growing as more content is being created and produced, right? And it's morphing into what it's wanting to become. Like with my podcast and even my social media activity, I can tell where I'm starting to find my niche in different areas. Um, and it's interesting, like you said, how it's a combination of not just the content creator that's producing the content, but it's also the engagements and the feedback and the everything that we're receiving from the audience and from our guests. It's really fascinating. And it just shows like things take time. That
Yeah.
point Seinfeld, it's not like everybody's going to realize that this is one of the best shows of our time, that was aired. It takes 10 years. It was on for what? How many seasons? 12
Yeah, I think nine, not, was it 12?
Or I think you're right. It might have been nine
Yeah.
seasons. Yeah. And then, another example is with like Joe Rogan's podcast, right? I
Yeah.
mean, he's one of the godfathers of the podcasting space, but that didn't happen overnight. I mean, he went through 10 years of producing content. I think he's recorded 1,500 episodes now, and at that peak is when, okay, someone like Spotify came in and said, you know what, the content and the repository of information that you've built up and you've curated, it's now worth the price tag, and we want to pay you for that. And I think that's the added bonus of what happens, I guess, for any content creator. But the real benefit is getting information and educating people around certain topics that they otherwise wouldn't look into, right? And and especially for cannabis, with both of what we're doing, I think we're so fortunate in what we do because there has been so much stigma around the plant for so long, and misinformation that those who understand and have learned the real benefits of it, it's like almost a gift to share that with others, because whether you want to smoke it or whether you want to have it in your house or if you want to do it or whatever or accept it, at least you need to understand the benefits that it can have on mankind, whether we're talking about it from a medicinal standpoint or industrial hemp standpoint for material goods. So that's what excites me most about what we do.
Absolutely. And I feel like also it's something that I've deepened my understanding of. And I feel like I've been a part of the cannabis community, for a long time. I mean, I love cannabis. I think it's like a wonder plant. I've loved it for a long time. People in my family, I mean, they call us the herbal Sherbills. Like people in my family love the plant. Like
uh,
I've known the beauty and that the fact that it really like does great things for certain people. But at the same time, since starting the podcast, I feel like I've deepened my understanding about what medicine is. And you asked about Dr. Ethan Russo, who was, he kind of like started the science behind GW Pharma, which is, a game changing, paradigm shifting company that's come out, with medicine for epilepsy, and they're working on other things. And Dale Hunt, who's another like rock star in the industry and like discovering a lot about the plant, like guests like that. And from honestly, from my first guest, just understanding and not thinking like, oh, I kind of like have to be in the shadows. Like nobody can really know that we're the herbal sherbil, like kind of just like being proud and not having any shame. And I didn't have a lot, but even I think we all have like some kind of like Cheech and Chong reference or lazy stoner or dumb stoner or I'm not living up to my potential because I'm smoking a joint, but really seeing how, first of all, how like it really works with some people's body and makeup and the chemistry that's in ways that it doesn't for, I don't think it's for everybody, but for some people that are suffering and for some people that are just living and use it to kind of heighten their life experience, I think I myself am growing and I hope that I'm spreading that because I do think it's gospel and I think it's so salient and huge for mankind to like understand that.
And I share the same feelings that you had initially. Like, you didn't put it this way, but like kind of being in the cannabis closet where you're like, what are people going to think? Are they going to think
Yeah.
less of me? Or, and I kind of struggled with that for a bit. But since, launching the podcast, which obviously I'm out there now and we're talking about it, I have a sense of comfort in doing what I'm doing and what we do because like come at me if you want to talk about it because look, I'm not saying I know it all, but
Yeah.
if you want to have the conversation about criminalizing marijuana, right, which was a term deemed by the government, and we can talk about the history and we can talk about how this plant was used over thousands of years to help mankind and the planet Earth, right, from a
Yeah.
sustainability standpoint. So I'm ready to have that conversation all day long, and I want to be a proponent of that message because it is so important, especially with this pandemic and how the economy has been impacted so much and so many businesses have been impacted and obviously people have lost their lives and whatnot. So I think this could be a real alternative solution, especially when you think about the potential for industrial hemp. I mean, that's one thing that I know is the listeners that are regularly listening to the podcast, I'm always talking about the potentials of industrial hemp because the applications are just endless, and the sustainability factor, the fact that, planting hemp in fields just is good for the soil and the intake of CO2 emissions. It's amazing. We need to start understanding that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I saw that you had Morris Spiegel on your show a little while ago. I had him on too, and I'm speaking of like industrial hemp uses. Like that guy is amazing. What
He's
he's doing for the industry.
spearheading it. I mean, like when I say that, I mean he's really putting it into action in terms of like thinking creative ways of producing material goods that are hemp based. You know, and a perfect example of that is his company Silver Hemp or Silver Mountain Hemp. And it's a guitar company. I posted it on my Instagram where he was showcasing a hemp based guitar that he had made with hemp straps produced by Levi. Levi is the one who you know produce those for them. So it's just really cool to see stuff like that. And I can't wait to see more and more like houses being built and cars being built. Um, you know, it's gonna be fascinating to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like this tweet today that was talking about research that they've been doing on cannabis, and they say that it's been like they're searching for the harmful effects rather than the benefits. Like it's been guided research on the negative side, and it's just like it's crazy.
Emma Chasen was recently on, I think on episode 36 or 35, but she was talking exactly about that. She goes, there's so much peer review and research studies that have been done. She goes, but it's all focused on like negative anecdotal, like, subjective kind of biases and whatnot. And a lot of we're limited in our study capabilities because, there's no I forget the term she used, but like person or human trial studies, right? So a lot of what we're doing is on rats and small rodents, whereas in other countries, as of most recent, they've been able to do that, to do those studies on humans, which is good for the industry overall because we can start to reference those peer review studies and whatnot. But yes, you're absolutely right that there's just been a huge kind of play to negate the research that's been done, and it's sad.
Absolutely.
It's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what have your guests been saying when it comes to like the future of I mean, obviously everybody's in agreement that, there's limitless potential, right? But like, what are their expectations in terms of like maybe this election or the possibility of legalization in 2021? I mean, what are you gathering?
I mean, it's a question I ask pretty much everybody that comes on the show. And I also think it's just really interesting. Like at the end of, I think I've done 85 episodes. So I think at the end, I just, even asking 85 people, like what they think of, experts in the field and people that have been, it's just interesting to see like the kind of, the scope of opinion. I would say it seems like most people feel like it's going to continue to be a state by state approach just because that's how the states pretty much work. They like to do it like that. They don't like to come down, especially with something like cannabis, like especially when you're talking about states that can kind of go a little bit crazy if that comes down federally.
There's more medical states now than there aren't, right? In
Right.
West.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I think there's like 33 or 34 at this point. Yeah, so I think it seems that that's the way it's going to go. I also feel like this election is so contentious and people are so like freaked out about so many more important things than cannabis. I don't think it's going to be like cannabis is legalized, but
But that's what
November
I wish.
1st.
That's what, going back to our point about like educating in terms of, even if you don't think it's important or whatnot, knowing the value of what it can bring, right? From all these different aspects. And so that's what I wish, like, and you and I will continue, and others, right, will continue to spread this education, that message. But until it's like a common way of thinking, it's going to be difficult to like basically what I'm saying is that I get that legalizing marijuana wouldn't be at the top of the priority list right now, but if people understood the economic impact that cannabis and industrial hemp and medicinal hemp and all that could provide, I think that there would be a different change in tune.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think probably me using the word important isn't even what I mean. I think I would probably say like pressing, if anything. Um, but I think on the other side, and what I've also heard from people, and I've talked to people that are kind of involved in lobbying for that legislation, and I've spoken to people on both sides of this, whereas meaning like some people feel we should be pushing for this legislation, meaning safe banking acts, meaning less onerous regulations for cannabis companies. all these things that are going to help and then give more money to the local governments and back to the taxpayer. I think there's other people that also feel like we shouldn't be folding in these cannabis laws to broader COVID legislation or broader, stimulus packages, because they should be standing on their own. And what if we miss out on the social equity component because it's like this economic relief, and then it's like the people that are going to be getting those benefits aren't the people that should be, and they're the huge cannabis corporations as opposed to the, I think there's a lot of questions and moving parts, and politics are
What
insane.
What do you think for those two different perspectives?
I think it's hard. I think what I was going to say is like politics are insane, and I think there almost never seems to be like an easy way out, because there's so many, first of all, nefarious biases and special interests and lobbying groups and things that even when I think I understand, I know I don't even understand the depths of the depravity that is going on there.
Understand what they want you to understand. You're like, wait, what's going on? What's more behind the curtain? What's happening behind the curtain that we're
totally. But what do you really mean? But what are you really saying? But what that can't, yeah, totally.
Why are you saying that? Why do you want that? Like, what's the motive behind that decision? Yeah.
Totally. I mean, there's like this more bill coming up in September, where it looks like a great bill. Do I feel like that has a chance of passing? Probably not, and even if it passes the House, does it pass the Senate? Like, probably no way in hell. Would I love for it to pass? Yeah, but I feel like would I love for exactly what you're saying, for politicians to understand that passing this legislation could help not just the stoners, like, yeah, but it doesn't, I guess, seem realistic. In my ideal version, I would love for it to be folded into some kind of COVID legislation while keeping the social equity components. Because I agree with you. I do think it's salient. I do think it could be a huge boost to the economy and also provide jobs. I mean, they're starting delivery service. They're starting even within an existing cannabis company. There's different jobs being created now, I think, because of how cannabis is getting to people.
Yeah. I was just gonna say is what you're saying is on point, and it is sticky when you're trying to bake in legislation that's related to COVID and whatnot, because then it becomes political, right? It's like, and it's almost like a detriment to the bill itself and what we're trying to push through, because while both parties may agree, like you said, there's no way in hell if Congress or the House passes it, that's the Senate will approve it, right? Because there's so much contention on both sides of the line of red and blue. So it's like this needs to be a partisan bill, or bipartisan bill, excuse me, where they're both working together, and it's just something to get done because it benefits the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, I mean, we're talking about like clinical studies. I would even say, like, without getting too far into it, even the studies that are being done around COVID right now, I feel like there's like a dearth of clinical trials, and yet we hear headlines like every day about what's coming out and what to expect, when really we have no idea. I mean, there's not like, binding clinical trials on anything. Like, we don't know what's happening. Like, they're just at best guesses. So I feel like I have a real frustration these days with like, science-backed research supporting like the people, as opposed to kind of like these empty headlines that are being thrown at us, that don't mean much, and that at best are like band-aids to a situation. So yeah, I feel like we just have to keep pushing.
We got to keep pushing, got to keep educating. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think the one sentiment that I've gathered from, when we're talking about the future of legalization and when that will happen is what you touched on, and the majority of my guests have said it's going to be state led, and actually the federal government's going to have to adopt the majority decision by the states to legalize, and that's when legislation and regulation will be put in place. So, but time will tell. I mean, we're on a good track with, the majority of the states being medical, and it seems like that's the trend, right? It goes from decriminalization in a particular state to medical state, then to eventually like adult use. So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's the yeah, let's hope. I mean, I feel like I saw recently like Oklahoma, they thought that they would be on the ballot this year for adult use because they've been medical, like a successful medical market. But they're not in the end. I'm hopeful and I definitely think we're on the right path. And I feel like, look, we wouldn't even be having this conversation 5 years ago. You know what I mean? Like things have changed ridiculously.
so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. People would be laughing at us like, what? Like that would be so far off the spectrum. You're right.
Yeah. Or like even like to think that I would have a cannabis investing podcast at Seeking Alpha 3 years ago, I'd be like, no, that's, talking about cannabis at work. That's crazy. Like,
I had a guest on, Louis Lujan. I think you'd enjoy that episode. So he works in like government relations, and he's a lobbyist for different things, and he's been a cannabis advocate and lobbyist at the government level, state, local, federal, you name it. And he was talking about like with his firm how initially like he moved to Arizona and started talking about cannabis and whatnot, and people were like, well, they were trying to talk to him about it, and they would like pull him out of the room and they'd try to talk to him in corners, and he's like, what are you doing? Go into the conference room and talk, like, and I thought that was admirable because it's just another way to remove that stigma, you know what I mean, and help people feel more confident and comfortable talking about this.
absolutely.
Another thing that Louis mentioned, speaking of different states putting it on the ballot to vote, is Arizona. This is a big year for Arizona. In November, they're going to be voting on adult use.
Hmm.
So, what Louis said was that could be a huge, like if Arizona passes that bill, it could be huge because it could just be basically a trickle effect for all the other kind of neighboring states and whatnot. Because at that point, if Arizona's going all in, why shouldn't we? Um, so
Because of the size and influence of the state.
I think so. I don't know the exact reason why. I have to look back and remember exactly what he said, but he did point to the possibility, or basically that happening, like that ripple effect, if Arizona were to pass. So I don't know the exact reason or why he was saying that, but
I know also, I mean, look, there's a number of MSOs that have like real established presences in that state and have for, I would say, like the past 12 months. So it does seem like, and Arizona, I mean, I don't know the state that well. It just seems like the kind of state that would pass it. I feel like it behooves them. And I don't see like rabid anti-cannabis sentiment coming out of that state. Like it does feel like it'll be interesting to see. I feel like it's interesting. Like I think that that's right. Also in terms of like the state by state approach, it's like you get a hub. Like I feel like probably when New Jersey, New York, like when they go legal, I feel like it'll be like, ripple effects on the East Coast as well.
yeah, it might be also like their geolocation, part of the four corners.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. And just the size of the neighboring states, like New Mexico is another example. And it's basically how you described Arizona. Like there's not much pushback when it comes to cannabis in Arizona or in New Mexico, which is where I'm from and where I grew up. It's a medical state at this point. So I think their next natural pivot will be to move to full adult use at some point.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
it's also interesting. I mean, like those states being near Colorado and Colorado being like the poster child for cannabis rollout. I mean, I think they've done the best job of any country or state to roll out legal cannabis. I feel like it must be inspiring.
Yeah, it definitely is, and especially when you're visiting those small cities
Yeah.
that are just across the border, in those mountainous areas and whatnot, and just to see the economic impact of how when for taxation purposes, right, and what they've done to put that money to fuel the local economy is incredible. I mean, there's this one place that we would visit in the mountains. It's Antonito, Colorado, and like 8 years ago, if you were to go there, it's just a small town that you drive right through, one bar, one grocery store, a couple of shops, and that's it. And now there's a few two or three dispensaries in that town, and of the last 5 years, I mean, their roads are painted, they have like a public park for children now. More stores and shops have sprouted up, so it's just amazing to see what can happen, when we can tax this commodity.
Totally. That's awesome. And it's so funny how lost that gets in the discussion. I feel like there's so many, discussions around like, well, if a dispensary's open and it can't be near a school and it can't be your kids, which is like obviously like all of those things are, like good laws to have and you don't want, but I feel like I don't think like dispensaries are like creating this like terrible like social, I don't know what the word is, when they come to a neighborhood. I feel like they give money for parks. They give money for your children. They bring better, revenue to your local government. Like, yeah, it seems like such an obvious thing.
Yeah, and most dispensaries, like compared to a bar, right? Like
Yeah, exactly,
are,
exactly.
are like a coffee shop experience. Like, you walk in and everything's real clean. There's glass where you can look through, or you're looking at different products. But whereas a bar, I mean, there's all kinds of different variables that come with that, right?
Totally, totally,
It's
totally.
so interesting. So
Yeah.
tell me more about, like, your recent podcast and what really stood out to you, and what you learned, in this past month.
So I think kind of like piggybacking off of that notion about like the MSOs that I was saying, like in regards to my conversation with Kim about kind of like understanding these MSOs. I've been focused on that a lot this month just because I feel like my favorite stocks and a stock that we talked about last time I was here, Grow Generation, which is
That they were killing it. Oh my gosh.
they're killing it. And then they had another that I don't know if you saw, like Hindenburg Research came out with like a short report against them, and I think scared a lot of people. They like similar to what happened with Trulieve, a short seller, Hindenburg Research, which publishes reports to go short the stock. Question their management. I mean, look, in this case, I will say, like, I don't totally know what to believe because there has been huge, the executives have been selling their shares, which is not something you want to say is being done in high numbers. Um, and there is some like questionable things about the background of some of the management that, again, I am not a professional. I have not done all my due diligence on this. I'm just basically parroting what's been released. But I think there is, Grow Generation is a stock that's been killing it. I mean, they're more than double where they were like not that long ago. Air Strategies, True Leave, like a lot of company, Green Thumb Industries, these companies are like soaring
Yeah.
and have a huge amount of like retail interest. Um, I think I'm trying to understand, are these the investments that I think they are? Are they going to be long lasting? And this doesn't apply to Grow Generation because Grow Generation trades on the New York, yeah, it trades on the New York Stock Exchange also, and it's not plant touching. So it doesn't have to abide by these onerous banking regulations, and it doesn't suffer from the 280E tax code, which really hampers a lot of growth for cannabis companies. So Grow Generation is like out of that part of the conversation, but for the MSOs, there are these huge numbers that are being reported in like 10 consecutive, quarters of record growth. I mean, like huge numbers and more projected growth. But with these onerous banking regulations, and let's say these onerous banking regulations are not worked out with the, election in November. Let's say they're not worked out for another year after the election because of crazy political, partisanship. Can they survive, even the good ones,
And that point is that you're speaking to the Safe Baking Act, right? So
Yeah.
and that part of that legislation that was kind of baked into what was being proposed, and if so, like, let's talk about the current state of the Safe Baking Act and where we're at with that.
So, like a year ago, the Safe Banking Act passed the House, but never passed the Senate. So, like a year ago, I think like towards the end of September, a year ago, I was in California and people were like ecstatic, super hopeful, and never passed. Then, since COVID, some people have been trying to fold it into COVID legislation. Like Kim Rivers was talking about this, like on my second conversation with her. She's a huge proponent of this and working like really closely with legislators and lobbyists to get this passed. I'm not sure that it's going to get passed, before the national presidential election. It doesn't seem like it's going to get folded into kind of any stimulus bill or COVID. I think right now they're talking about the Moore bill, which is way more. I mean, it's not tied into the banking regulation, so it's a little bit different. But in terms of the scope of how much it could help, like cannabis, it would be like deregulation and bringing in lower economic, business people to be able to get licenses, things like that. But it's not. It basically would get rid of the banking because it would be descheduled at the federal level. So it would kind of like get rid of that at that point. Once it's descheduled at the federal level, you won't have these onerous banking regulations because it'll be legal.
And to be specific, when you say descheduled, does that mean like completely removing it from the scheduled list, or basically moving as a Schedule 2?
Right. So it's a good distinction. There's also a different, like, between being decriminalized and being descheduled, and exactly what that means. I believe the MORE Act is, I'm going to look this up so I don't misspeak. Um, but I think the MORE Act is for descheduling, so it wouldn't be on the Schedule 1 list, but not necessarily federally legal. I believe that that's right. But I also don't think that it has a chance of passing.
Right.
Um,
There's
but
only, I think there's only two members of the Senate that approve it, or something like that, or two Republicans or something like that. So yeah.
yeah, it doesn't, I don't think have like a strong chance of passing. But yeah, some people want to fold it into COVID. I'm just not sure that that's likely at this point. But I think it's something to watch. Like, I think it's a real thing for investors to watch. As excited, and I'm excited about the MSOs, and I'm excited about like the stocks that are in my portfolio and that I talk about on the podcast. I'm excited about Grow Generation also. But there are questions around it. So I think like I have an episode coming up where I am interviewing somebody that's wanting to get into the cannabis sector, like an author at Seeking Alpha that has been an investor for a few years, interested in getting into the cannabis sector, has a ton of questions. And we had this back and forth for a while. And then I realized it would be a great episode to have you come on with an established, somebody who's been investing for decades, has been investing in cannabis for more than a few years, and comes from a financial advisory background. So really has kind of like, the lexicon and the context with which to speak about what is something to be scared about, what is something to be, wary of, but not necessarily to throw you off of the path. So that's something that I'm excited about, kind of like seeing how cautious we should be, because when you're dealing with cannabis and it's not federally legal, like there's risk, like even in the best companies, if they're plant touching, especially if they're not trading on a major exchange, which these MSOs aren't, what's the risk factor there? And I think I talk a lot about the exciting things, but I also want to be real, and it's like, I think at this time where we're seeing these soaring share prices, I think a great time to check in with yourself and and check in with reality.
That's right. Yeah, because as we know, this market is very volatile. So,
Absolutely.
um, well, you were. I think that's a really good thing that you're going to do is and bring that seasoned investor on. That's basically interested in entering the cannabis market, right? And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, and it's that kind of unique lens that experts from other industries can have, and the value that they can add to it. So that's one episode I'll definitely be tuning into to learn more from a investor standpoint, what his thoughts are, being on the outside.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, and there's this whole notion of like how much this time in the cannabis sector is like the dot-com days, like at the beginning of the millennium or at the end of the last one. And that's also, even if you haven't been investing in cannabis, but you're familiar with the volatility of a new sector, and a sector that's really going to change people's lives, like the dot-com, companies changed our lives. I think it's just a really exciting time, but at the same time, super salient to be aware of the risks, and not just like the broad risks, but I think it's important as investors that we are in touch with what we're invested in, even if it's on a long-term horizon.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what are your predictions for September?
Great question. More volatility.
That's an easy one. Come on.
More volatility ahead. Um, no, it's a good question. I think there. Look, we saw some companies release earnings. Like let's speak about Truly for a second. We're talking about the Florida market. They just announced that edibles are now legal in Florida, which is like a huge catalyst. We were, speaking about like the power and the numbers in the patients in the Florida market. Um, and I think this is true in general right now, like with COVID. I think people are, look, I think flower, I'm sure your guests say the same thing, that flower is always going to be flower. People are always going to love flower.
Hmm.
But I think the whole idea of topicals and oils and edibles, I think is really huge. And I think it's the fact that Florida just legalized it. I think more states are going to go online with allowing edibles and oils, and I think that's something really exciting to look for, like what companies are doing that well. Maybe not in September, but a little bit further out. Also, what companies are figuring out the beverages, because a lot of people are talking about beverages, but they're not really figuring it out. Like, will Canopy Growth be able to figure that out and really take the market share there? I think it's a possibility, even though I don't have a ton of bullishness about on Canopy Growth. Um, like I'll say something interesting about Canopy Growth. Like they have the highest market cap in the sector, and for a long time they were looked at as a leader in the space. And they changed management, and it was a huge thing. And now recently on their last earnings call, like they stopped providing, like speaking of transparency, they're now providing less data than they were, and they're doing worse than they ever were. So I'm thinking, just like as an investor, and I'm not invested in that company, but as a prospective investor or somebody like, I would be like, why are you doing that? Why are you being less transparent when people are looking at you even closer? Like, so there's like, when I see a company like that, it doesn't make sense. So there's still earnings being released. I feel like what to pay attention to, like notice those things. Like there are changes being made. Excuse me. I think it's really imperative that we pay attention to those changes and why they're happening. And I think honestly, sometimes we don't know. Um, but I think the more we research and the more we dig, I think the answers might not come in flashing lights, but I think we develop a deeper understanding. I think the more research we do. So I would say that's what I'm looking for in September, is to kind of just be really cognizant of what's happening in the sector, because I think there's a ton of really exciting headlines, with some of them for good reason. I think there are a lot of exciting things happening in the sector, but super important to just not be cavalier about that excitement, and to be sober, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting that you mentioned the your prediction of like topicals and salves and tinctures and edibles and things like that really um, gaining some momentum in the near future. And I couldn't agree more, not only because that's just another method of consuming, right, that people would want to do outside of smoking, but think about the potential of extracting those products from the various cannabinoids that we know of and that we're currently learning about, right? So CBD has obviously been a major cannabinoid that's trending for a while, but with the emergence of CBG and what we've learned about with like CBN when it comes to like helping you sleep and whatnot, I mean, I think that as those become more understood and more mainstream, it's just gonna the floodgates are gonna open, right?
And I think I don't know if you saw this, but there was a company, I'm forgetting the name, but there was a company in Canada that just released their flower, and it says that what terpenes are in there and what percentage, and they're the first company to do that, and that's like huge. I think in terms of further understanding like the plant itself. And I think also, actually, this was something else to look for, is the notion of like new cannabinoids, but also CBD. I think they haven't even figured out CBD in the marketplace. Like, yes, it's legal, but we don't know what the hell we're doing with it right now in the States. So I think the FDA is due to make like a more pronounced announcement regarding like the regulations around CBD. I think in the coming month.
We've
I
been
think that's
waiting
going to
for
be
a
huge.
while. We've been waiting for a while. Yeah, the FBA.
I know. But it's interesting, and like Charlotte's Web, the founder just left. I think there's going to be interesting things happening in the CBD market. As I mean, you're right. Who knows if they will figure it out in the near term? But I think the more they do, or the closer they come to it, I think we're going to start, because I think it's still really hard in terms of investing. For me, anyways, I think it's still really hard to see who the winners in that space are. Um, and I think with management changes, you see that as a harbinger of more change afoot. I mean, we saw that in the cannabis, like in the plant touching sector this year, with a ton of management changes. And that means that companies are kind of going in a different direction because the sector's changing a little bit. Like I think a lot of, we're talking about like serious, fiscally responsible management. Like I think a lot of that came in the past like 7 months, let's say, after like a year to 2 years of really rampant expansion and less responsible. I think that may be happening in the CBD market as well. I think the people that were in at the beginning, kind of like, because it's legal and because it's easy, I think are going to be churned out in favor of more serious fiscal practitioners, I think.
Hmm. What are you seeing in terms of like the industrial hemp market, right? I mean, is it just too much in its infancy yet to where we're seeing real serious players emerge in the space, like, on the supply chain side, or equipment manufacturers for processing and decorticating and things like that? I mean, are you seeing any of that activity or
I
emergence?
think like for the consumer side, it's too early. I mean, I think for consumers, we're not really going to be seeing the fruits of all that work for a while. But in terms of investing, I think there's stuff to be looking for right now. Yeah, I mean, I think like the mainstream industrial players are getting into the industrial hemp game. And I think the more they do, I think it's going to be a really interesting space to keep watching. I definitely, it's, it hasn't figured out exactly where it is, even though hemp with the farm bill, it's legal. But I think with the FDA, with, regulations being figured out, I think it's still evolving. But I definitely don't think it's too early to get interested or invested in the space in some way. I think there's a ton of companies to be looking at, that have the potential to kind of make a name for themselves there. And even as not even just like retail public investors, but I think if you're talking about wanting to invest in the cannabis space in general, like as a private investor even, or to follow it, I think these are exciting times. I mean, these are like paradigm shifting changes, and I think it's being decided now. So I think like in a year or 2 years, I think we're going to see it's going to be a lot clearer. But I think if you're interested in that side of things, now is the time to kind of suss out who's going where and who's doing what, and how best to capitalize on that.
Yeah, that's a great approach, and it doesn't come very often where you can be at the forefront of an industry that's just barely figuring itself out, and like you said, doing that initial research to see what companies are making what moves to become relevant in the space. So I agree with you, and that's what I'll be planning to do over the next year or two for sure within the industrial hemp side. Um,
Yeah, I know at the last conference I was at, I was with a friend who inherited a plot of land in North Carolina from family that had passed, and was going around to kind of like a lot of the executives being like, what do you think I should do with this hemp space? What do you think I should do with this hemp space? Like, I mean, there's just like a crazy amount of potential, and just really interesting time. And I think like what you were saying, like the whole reason that hemp hasn't been like a viable commodity, or had been for many generations, but in recent times hasn't been for a while. It's just really exciting to see that change. I think it's just like getting rid of archaic, in many instances, racist, policies. It's just really great to see that changing, even with all the BS that comes with it. It's just really nice to see.
Right. So look out, petroleum and lumber and paper. There's a new sheriff in town. Hemp's coming.
That's right. That's right.
Hemp is coming. I can see, like, I'm picturing this, like, hemp cowboy just walking into the saloon. He's a new sheriff, coming to take over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Rena, before we wrap up, what do you want to leave the audience with in terms of maybe investing advice or what to look out for the next month or a couple of months, year? What do you want to leave the audience with?
Well, one, I'd like to say thank you to Kevin for having me on. I appreciate always coming on and talking to you. I feel like it's a really more than anything, it's really fun. It's a really good conversation, and I enjoy doing it. I hope, in addition to that, it's informative. But for me, it's informative, and I love sharing our knowledge. So thanks to you and thanks to your audience. Um, and the first thing I would say is I'd love to hear from people and what they want to hear from, what they're interested in, questions they have, because as we talked about at the beginning, that fuels all of us. Um, and I think things to look out for, I mean, the edible thing, the progressing of the sector, especially I think in COVID in terms of, maybe moving away from smokable product and evolving into um, the next phase of growth in the sector. So I think just keep looking at that space. And look, if you're asking me the part of the space that I'm looking at in the next month, 2 years, stocks that I'm leaving in my portfolio, and the only way that I would touch them is to be adding more shares. I'm pretty much looking at the MSO space along with grow generation. But everything else I'm looking at is the MSO and a small Israeli company, because you got to represent where you live. And I also feel like there's just a ton of interesting, fun things happening in Israel, and they're the company that I think are primed, Istracan Biosciences, that are primed to maybe take advantage of that in some way. Even though ever since I bought them, it's like, whoop. Um,
In time.
In time, man, in time. Because a lot of others are like, whoa, every time I open it, I'm just like, wow, what? Like, what grow generation? You're doing what right now?
Man, they've been on a wild ride. It's been fun to look at my portfolio and see that those stocks increase for sure. I'm
Yeah,
can continue it.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's fun to feel like a genius, even if maybe it's not a reflection of the true status. But yeah, it's definitely fun when people are like, man, you mentioned this, and now it's like, oh my God, you're like, yeah, yeah,
I told you so. I told you.
I tell you.
Well,
Now you're getting in at 22, man.
I wanted to say I appreciate the kind words, and you're always a pleasure to have on. And for the audience that's listening, Rena's agreed to be on once a month. So um, we'll usually be recording at the end of each month to just provide a recap of what trends we saw and what actions have been made in the market, and then also just get to know each other a little better and share our experience as podcasters in this space, as well as talk about upcoming trends that we're going to predict. So, Rena, you're a true expert and you have a wealth of knowledge that we appreciate. And I look forward to talking with you next month.
Thanks, Kevin. Likewise.
Oh, and actually, this little side note. So we'll have to record mid-October because I will be getting married at the end of
Oh,
September, and I will be on my honeymoon. So,
wow, so exciting.
yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so we'll have to record when I get back after the 9th of October.
Okay, that's exciting. Wait, hold on. Are you doing a socially distanced wedding?
We're going to, so we initially, and we've kept with the plan, we were doing a destination wedding in Mexico.
Oh, awesome.
That it was originally scheduled for April 24th, and of course, due to COVID, we had to push it. So the only other date available was the end of September. So everything's open. They're practicing their social distancing, and the resort is at, I think, 25% capacity. So yeah, we're gonna do it. We're really excited.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's super exciting. Congratulations. Mazel tov, as they say where I'm from. Lot of happiness and blessings. I hope you guys enjoy the celebration, and I'm happy to hear that people are celebrating and doing life cycle events in the midst of all this like uncertainty. So yeah, a ton of blessings and good luck to you guys.
Thank you so much, Rena. I really appreciate that. And thank you all for listening. And I look forward to talking with you next time. Bye.
Talk to you later, Mr. Kevin.
See ya, Herbal Sherbill.
Nice.